He has the most who is most content with the least. Today, a friend of mine will explain it to you.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fast-paced, absolutely biting story of history's ultimate disruptor, Diogenes of Sinope. Look, I want you to forget the dusty, boring philosophers in white robes quietly pondering the universe. Instead, we are looking at a man who weaponized comedy, actively embraced absolute poverty, and spent his entire life aggressively mocking the wealthiest and most powerful people in ancient Greece. So, I want you to ask yourself right now, how did a man who purposely lost everything, a guy who actually got exiled from his hometown for literally defacing the local currency, become a legend? How did his ideas perfectly deconstruct our modern hyper-consumerism? Well, Diogenes didn't just sit around and write about philosophy. He lived it out, in the streets, in the most extreme, undeniable way possible. Okay, let's jump into his first radical stunt. He gave up all of his physical possessions to sleep in a recycled wine container. Seriously. When Diogenes arrived in Athens, he decided that society was basically just a trap. So he took up residence in a pithos. That's a massive ceramic clay jar, originally meant for food storage, and he plopped it right down in the middle of the city. And that naturally brings us to Pillar 1, the barrel dweller. Now, to really challenge our modern addiction to luxury, we have to look at the literal root of his philosophy. The word cynic actually comes from the Greek word kunin, which just means dog. And instead of being insulted by this, Diogenes proudly owned it. He loved being called a dog because, think about it, dogs live completely carefree. They don't worry about rent or fancy food or polite manners. They judge people entirely by their actions, wagging their tails at the good ones and biting the bad ones. Diogenes wanted to prove that humanity had totally lost its way by demanding constant comforts, things like honey cakes, expensive perfumes, and massive estates. His absolute minimalism was staggering. This was his entire inventory for living. A threadbare cloak to wear and sleep in, a little pouch for scavenged scraps, and a stick. That's it. At one point, he actually carried a wooden bowl to drink from. But one day he saw a child drinking water directly from their bare hands. Realizing he had just been beaten in plainness of living by a literal kid, he immediately threw his bowl away. So, the crucial point here is that Diogenes proved humans need almost nothing to survive. He exposed our modern more money, more problems treadmill as a complete trap. Just think about our Black Friday frenzies or the endless cycle of phone upgrades. Diogenes would argue that your possessions actually own you. By choosing to own nothing, he had absolutely zero social pressure and total, undeniable freedom. Which leads us perfectly into Pillar 2, looking for an honest man. You see, Diogenes didn't just want to live quietly in his jar. He wanted to wake everyone else up. Picture the sheer cinematic audacity of this. He's pushing through the bustling daytime crowds in Athens, holding a burning lamp. It's high noon, broad daylight. The sun is shining brightly. And here is this ragged philosopher holding a lit lantern right up to people's faces as they try to go about their daily business. Naturally, confused citizens kept asking what in the world he was doing, and he delivered this biting punchline, exposing that he couldn't find anyone actually living up to their true human potential. In some versions of the story, he said he was looking for a real human being. His point was absolutely devastating. The people around him were so incredibly obsessed with money, status, and fake manners that they had ceased to be authentic humans. They were basically just playing dress-up. What's really fascinating is how he weaponized the contrast between fake societal rules, which the Greeks called nomos, and raw, natural truth, known as physis. He was directly calling out the performative hypocrisy of his era, which, let's be real, looks a lot like ours today. He firmly believed that society makes you miserable by forcing you to care about silly titles and manners, while nature already provides everything you actually need to be happy. Let's move to Pillar 3, telling the emperor no. Okay, set the scene with me. In Corinth, Alexander the Great, literally the most powerful man alive who is actively conquering the known globe, comes to visit this famous philosopher. Alexander finds Diogenes just relaxing, sunning himself in the dirt. The king stands over him and says, "Ask of me any boon you like. I can give you absolutely anything." And here it is, the ultimate power move. Diogenes completely punctures the emperor's pomposity without even bothering to stand up. Alexander the Great is offering him unfathomable wealth, cities, power, the whole shebang. And Diogenes essentially just tells him, "You're blocking my light. Move."
It's just a devastating rejection of the subjective principle of power. Diogenes proved, right there, that the emperor had absolutely nothing of value to offer him.
This brilliantly illustrates the concept of parrhesia, or fearless speech. A king who had everything envied the freedom of a man who had nothing. Alexander was so struck by this absolute lack of fear and desire that he turned to his laughing guards and told them that if he couldn't be the conqueror of the world, he would want to be the dog in the dirt, because only Diogenes was truly free.
But how do you achieve that kind of terrifying confidence? That brings us to Pillar 4, the death of shame. Freedom for the Cynics wasn't just a given right, it was something you had to actively train for, relentlessly. Diogenes weaponized public embarrassment and antisocial behavior to completely murder his own social anxiety. He embraced anadeia, or total shamelessness. The Cynics basically argued that if an action is natural, like eating, sleeping, or any bodily function, there is absolutely no logical reason to be ashamed of doing it in public. Society's rules of etiquette? Completely fake. Nature? That's real.
Now you have to understand, these weren't just crazy PR stunts. This was a rigorous, daily training regimen known as ascesis. He did this to become entirely immune to rejection, pain, and peer pressure. I mean, why beg for money from a stone statue? Well, as Diogenes himself said, to get practice in being refused. He was literally bulletproofing his mind against the fear of what other people thought of him.
When he was scolded by angry passersby for indecently satisfying a natural urge in public, specifically, masturbating right there in the marketplace, he just dropped this unapologetic one-liner to totally trample on the pretenses of polite society. To Diogenes, the politicians, who were stealing money and filing unjust lawsuits, were doing things vastly more disgusting and unnatural than a human being simply answering a basic biological call.
And he didn't need erudite academic rhetoric to destroy Plato's famous definition of a human as a featherless biped. Nope. He just crashed Plato's lecture holding a plucked bird, proving right then and there that action beats theory. While Plato is inside using all these big words to define reality, Diogenes used pure comedy and spectacle to completely dismantle the intellectual elites. He actually forced Plato to awkwardly add "with broad flat nails" to his definition.
All right, let's look at the philosophical payoff in Pillar 5, the ultimate freedom.
Why go through all this? The pain, the absolute poverty, the constant public ridicule. Well, here's the core cynical takeaway. True power doesn't come from your status, your wealth, or how many likes you get. It comes from needing absolutely nothing from anyone. This is autarkia, meaning self-sufficiency, and eleutheria, meaning freedom. If you require external validation, a fancy job title, or luxury goods just to be happy, you are basically a hostage to those things.
Let's think about the modern application of this. 2,500 years before influencers, targeted ads, and crushing corporate burnout, the Cynics warned us that civilization traps you in things and it makes you miserable. The more you buy into the system, the more the system owns your time, your energy, and your peace of mind. Diogenes was literally the ultimate antidote to the rat race.
And it all builds to this final brilliant irony. The conqueror of the world was actually a slave to his own desires, while the homeless man was the only true king. Alexander spent his entire short life rushing across the globe, bleeding, fighting, and conquering, all because the whole world simply wasn't enough for him. Meanwhile, Diogenes sat quietly in his jar, totally content, mastering the only thing you actually can control in this life, yourself.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you with this biting challenge. Are you actually living as a free human being, or are you just another prisoner of the marketplace? Diogenes shows us that true freedom is terrifying, it's hilarious, and it is entirely up to you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.